Neen Hicks, Senior Lecturer at the School of Law and Chairperson of the UKZN's Gender-Based Violence Committee, South Africa. Honorable Nacheli Ramirez Hernandez, Human Rights Commissioner of Mexico City and the President of IOI, Mexico. Ms. Lwandisa Zaula, Outreach Coordinator at the Office of the Public Protector, South Africa. Our facilitator, the Honorable Justice Florence Mumba. Excellencies and Honorable Ombudsmen who are able to join us, distinguished participants and guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor and the Council of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the Dean of the School of Law, I have great pleasure in welcoming you to this morning's webinar session on ensuring gender equity, the role of the Ombudsman. This session is in honor of South Africa's celebration of Women's Month, which is this month of August. Our host today is the Africa Ombudsman Research Center, known as AORC, which is the research and training arm of the Africa Ombudsman and Mediators Association, known as IOMA. In recent years, AORC has transitioned to more digital platforms to engage, more digital platforms of engagement. And this has ensured that the robust participation of many can occur with participants being able to log in from all over the world. AORC has always been swift to revise its program in line with the various needs of the current epoch. I'm heartened to report that despite facing numerous challenges, we are continuing to deliver on our mandate to promote capacity development, knowledge generation, and professionalism within IOMA in furtherance of good governance, the rule of law, and the protection of human rights. An ombudsman is an official who is charged with representing the interests of the public by investigating and addressing complaints of maladministration or a violation of human rights by public authorities. In general terms, an ombudsman is a state official appointed to provide a check on government activity in the interests of the citizen and to oversee the investigation of complaints of improper government activity against government activity against the citizen. Public officers make decisions and determinations in the course of delivering services relating to many issues, and these ought to be done in a fair and equitable manner, and in a manner that develops human rights, both physical and human resources within its ranks. Public officials are expected to make their determinations in a fair manner and in a non-oppressive manner, which benefits the public at large. The citizen will turn to the ombudsman when the public officer's decision or determination is seen to be unfair or oppressive. By checking allegations of maladministration and inquiring into the decision-making process, the ombudsman can determine how the decision was made and consequently make recommendations that target and improve service, and more importantly, help to prevent similar occurrences in the future. Public accountability and good governance are assured only if all participants draw and learn from their errors. This remains the fundamental principle behind the work of the ombudsman, for without it, there's no way that the office can make a real difference. If it is the goal of the ombudsman to ensure that good governance prevails, that acts of maladministration are rectified, then this goes to the heart of upholding the democratic state. This morning's webinar will be taking an issue that is hugely important to the citizenry and ensuring accountability in the manner in which public officials perform their functions. Ensuring gender equality is of particular relevance in South Africa and many other countries around the world, where women continue to be the most vulnerable subset of society. Indeed, the current South African epoch is founded on values of non-racialism and non-sexism. To ensure its detailed articulation and implementation in the society, 2 laws have been enacted, namely the Employment Equity Act 55 of 1998 and the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act 4 of 2000. The Employment Equity Act goes so far as to declare that unequal pay for work of the same value amounts to unfair discrimination and is thus prohibited. Yet, South Africa continues to face challenges with equity, African women being the worst affected by this problem. I would like to thank you for your participation in these proceedings once again and welcome you to this interesting discussion that will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very, very inspiring and eloquent address by Dr. Ndwe Mukutu. We are very grateful that you have actually pointed out some of the areas of concern and some of the areas where there is some success. I'm glad to facilitate this webinar because it's so important to celebrate this month as Women's Month, because we need to push ourselves forward and we need to celebrate our accomplishments as women. And as we look at the Ombudsman institution, we're trying to see how far the Ombudsman institution can go in our countries in ensuring gender equity or gender balance or gender streamlining in our institutions all over in our countries. So thank you very much for your address. I'll proceed with the first speaker, who is Dr. Janine Hicks. Dr. Janine Hicks is a senior lecturer at the School of Law, where she serves as convener for the Navi Pillay Research Interest Group and chairperson of the University of KwaZulu-Natal Gender-Based Violence Committee. Hicks holds a PhD and an LLB from the University of KwaZulu-Natal and a Master of Arts in Development Studies from the University of Sussex, United Kingdom. Her research interests are in transformative constitutionalism.
Sorry, Honorable Mumba, may I interrupt you? May I interrupt you a bit? The president of IOMA is with us. If she can be very welcome.
Yeah. Yes, she's most welcome. Thank you very much. Yes. I understand the president of IOMA has joined us. So welcome her, and we proceed with listening to her address. You're most welcome, Honorable Antonio Flobera do Jesus. I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing it properly, but you're most welcome, and you can go ahead with your address.
Bom dia, good morning. Honorável Doutora Nachelle Ramírez Fernandes, Provedora de Justiça da República Federal do México e Presidente do Instituto Internacional dos Provedores de Justiça, Honorável Doutora Kuleka Kaleka, Provedora de Justiça da República da África do Sul e Presidente do Conselho de Pesquisa da ORC e da Região de África, Meritíssima Juíza Florence Mumba, antiga Provedora de Justiça da República da Zâmbia, Excelentíssima Senhora Professora Doutora Ndwe Mukutu, representante da Faculdade de Direito da Universidade de KwaZulu-Natal, honoráveis colegas provedores de justiça e mediadores, minhas senhoras e meus senhores. Manifesto a minha profunda gratidão em nome da Associação dos Provedores de Justiça e Mediadores da África, a OMA, pela realização deste evento, encontro de partilha de conhecimentos e experiências, porque é sempre um momento de grande expectativa. Todos devemos acolher e apoiar estas atividades para o bem das instituições que dirigimos e representamos, assim como para poder ajudar o exercício dos nossos mandatos, que consiste em servir e defender o cidadão. Saúdo particularmente o Centro Africano de Investigação de Produtos de Justiça, ORP, e o Instituto Internacional de Produtos de Justiça, IOI, pela organização. Ao webinar de hoje tem como objetivo levar ao debate o papel do produto de justiça na promoção e defesa da equidade do género nas nossas comunidades, procurar consciencializar a sociedade sobre a necessidade de se envidar esforços necessários para cada vez mais a mulher ao redor do mundo conheça e compreenda os seus direitos, para evitar que continue a ser vítima de várias violações, como foi no passado e que hoje ainda é uma realidade. O produtor de justiça, enquanto promotor e mediador garante dos direitos fundamentais do cidadão, contribui bastante para uma sociedade virtuosa, imparcial, que respeita a igualdade dos direitos de todos quanto nela vivem, socorrendo-se de vários mecanismos para a promoção destes direitos. Considero ser de grande importância conversarmos através de webinars como este, workshops e palestras, e de eventos comunitários sobre diferentes injustiças enfrentadas pelas mulheres a nível do mundo, assim como sobre a falta de equidade no local de trabalho ou na sociedade, a exclusão econômica, a violência doméstica, a violência psicológica, a violência sexual, a discriminação sobre a integridade e autonomia física, a exclusão da educação, que são direitos que merecem uma especial atenção por parte das instituições como as nossas produtoras de justiça. Em Angola, nós temos uma lei contra a violência doméstica, que neste momento está em estudo para ser alterada. Deste modo, eu apelo a todos os produtores de justiça que tenhamos um mecanismo de proteção e defesa dos direitos das mulheres vítimas das violações dos seus direitos, para que a mulher, através das nossas instituições, encontre amparo e proteção dos seus direitos e que os seus violadores sejam exemplarmente responsabilizados. Em Angola, a Procuradora de Justiça aprovou um despacho que cria uma comissão de acompanhamento à violência doméstica. Deste modo, auguramos que este webinar traga uma reflexão que todos nós precisamos, bem como as soluções para a redução da problemática sobre a violência e violação dos direitos das mulheres na nossa sociedade, erradicando a violência contra a mulher. Muito obrigado a todos. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam President of IOMA. We have gained some points from your address. We see how important mediation is in the whole realm of the Ombudsman Institution's work. So thank you very much for your address. You're most welcome. We'll now move on to the listed speakers, and I'll start from the beginning to introduce Dr. Janine Hicks.
Thank you, Honourable Mumba. Should I proceed?
Proceed.
Thank you. So greetings to Honourable Antonia, Honourable Mumba, yourself as our facilitator of this session, our Public Protector South Africa, Honourable Tralega, other Honourable members, President and colleagues from AOC. Thank you for this invitation to join in this important discussion in our Women's Month, as my colleague Dr. Makutu spoke to. I've been asked to speak briefly to the issue of gender equity in the public sector, and for us to consider from the sector as ombudsman, what are the implications for state failure to address gender inequality and gender discrimination within the public sector as a form of maladministration? What is the role of a public protector or ombudsman in addressing that? And I was asked to just give a backdrop to that and a sense of some of the statistics inherent. Why won't it let me proceed? Voila. I have shared this presentation. It will be distributed to participants in our deliberations today. And I thought I would share with you just some readings and some places to gather the statistics that I've referred to and some of the issues that we're confronting in this space. I thought this was, I come from South Africa, and I share with you some statistics from South Africa, but I paint that within the context globally of transformation and within the workplace and women's leadership. But I thought this comes from our Employment Equity Commission's 17th Annual Equity Report. And I thought just to highlight, despite the legislative interventions that Dr. Maquthu made reference to, the fact that South Africa has embedded within our constitution a prohibition on discrimination on the basis of gender, and we've adopted a legislative framework that promotes gender equality and amongst those spaces, gender equity within the workplace. The reality on the ground and the statistics in the annual reporting that comes in before our Employment Equity Commission year after year is that the workplace profile at the upper echelons in organizations is mostly white and male. So the reality in South Africa is that our workplaces remain racialized and gendered. And unequal treatment at work is the biggest problem facing women in paid working developing economies such as South Africa. Unequal treatment at work, and we'll consider what that unequal treatment, what forms that takes, how that is manifest. A critical issue, Dr. Maquthu referenced this, the concept of equal pay for work of equal value. Despite this having been made an unfair labor practice in our legislative framework, the reality again is that women are still paid less than men doing the same work. So I invite us to consider, as I work through this brief presentation, how does this come about? Despite this political will and these political commitments and the legislative framework, how do our workplaces remain untransformed? And the kinds of discrimination and inequality that is experienced by women in the workplace, how do those persist? And of course, within the context of the Ombudsman, we're contemplating that within the public sector. So I invite us to consider the societal norms that are inherent in this equation, the gendered power discrimination and inequality and imbalance, our societal norms and beliefs and practices pertaining to the role, traditional and stereotypical roles for men and women, how this impacts on how women are perceived within the professional sector and in the public sector, and how this impacts on their participation in the economy and how they advance. So for us to consider what are those societal norms and how they inform and perpetuate gender discrimination and how they follow us into the workplace, because the workplace is any other space within us, it's the same as any other space within our society. And these norms and perceptions follow us into the workplace. And it's for us to consider how these impact on women's participation, advancement, and experience within the workplace. And again, particularly for today's consideration within the public sector. But then critically, our brief for today is to consider the role of ombudsman. How do we address these issues? How do we drive a gender transformation process within the public sector? How do we address this form of maladministration? So I thought I would share with you, just briefly drawing on this very useful resource. This is the World Economic Forum. They're situated at Davos. I'm always fascinated, these conservative, patriarchal economic institutions and economic policy institutions are gripped with this issue of gender inequality. Why is the World Bank, why is the World Economic Forum concerned about the gender gap? It's because it impacts on the GDP. It impacts on a country gross domestic product. It impacts on the country's ability to attain their developmental targets. And it is of concern to economists to address gender inequality. So apart from those of us in the gender activist space. So anyhow, they share with us on an annual basis, and I've given you the website where you can access these statistics. Globally in 2024, the gender gap stands at just over 30%. So statistically, and when we look at women's progress and advancement globally, 68.5% of that gap between men and women's progress and advancement within the various spaces of society has been closed. And my little thing is in the way here, but at the rate that we are going, if we continue at this rate, we will see gender parity within 131 years. With due respect, we will all be dead by then. So within 131 years, we will see gender equality within our societies if we continue at the rate at which we're going. I won't go through these in detail. What does the World Economic Forum track? They track gender in education. And you can see there this education and health are the spaces where we see gender inequality has primarily been closed, which has contributed towards this overall 68% closure of the gender gap. So there's an education gap of around 5% in terms of gender equality and a health gap of around 4%. What are they tracking there? In education, they're tracking literacy levels and enrollment of girls in primary and tertiary education. Why are we concerned about education? Because of the implications for young girls and women's development, health, fertility, infant mortality, etc. Within health, we're tracking, the World Economic Forum tracks nutrition and health practices within the household, access to reproductive health services, and the well-being of elderly women as well. But it is the remaining two categories that I invite you to lend your eyes. Women's formal representation in politics, that gap is standing at 77.5% closed. The gap stands at 77.5%. It is only closed at the level of 22.5%. It'll take 169 years, if we continue at the pace that we're going, to close the gender gap within political representation. As at 2024, women hold 26.9% of parliamentary seats and only 23% of ministerial positions. Have a look, however, at women's economic participation. The gap is closed at 60.5%, and this is looking at women's participation in the economy and representation in positions of leadership. We are currently 5 generations behind our Sustainable Development Goals target for 2030 in terms of women's representation. I made reference to this earlier, some interesting statistics for you to consider. Why are economists concerned with aspects of gender equality? And there's the research and the concerns that have been articulated in some of those resources that I shared with you. That correlation between gender parity and gross national income. Economists have tracked that countries that have closed their gender inequality gap are outperforming countries in terms of GDP. So the more a country addresses and eradicates gender discrimination and inequality, the better performing that country is in terms of attainment of, in terms of its gross national income levels, but its attainment of its development targets. So this is what drives the interest and the concern and the investment from an economic perspective. They've calculated for the US, if there were greater gender parity in the States, it would add 1.2 billion to the US GDP. And you can have a look at the statistics in terms of women's average earnings. Globally, half of those of men. Men doing 1/3 of the unpaid work that women do. That old adage of women's unpaid labor and our contribution to the economy that is unrecognized and unquantified persists. Some of our feminist literature and theory, I saw from some of the questions that were put forward, many of you are interested in thinking and writing more on issues of gender inequality. Underpinning these are concerns around women's bearing the main burden of housework and childcare, and the impact that not only the impact that has on women's participation, but how women's unpaid labor, in fact, is our economies and our patriarchal structure of our economies depend on women's unpaid contribution, which ultimately, as we see, benefits men. Because men predominate in the workplace, they earn twice as much as we do globally. But we're forced also to consider, we're not purely looking at women's numerical representation in the workplace, but if we consider a feminist analysis of labor law and contemplate the actual conditions of women within the workplace, and this is where I'd invite you as ombudsman, especially when we're seeking to identify forms of maladministration within the public sector pertaining to gender equality. These are research and our statistics tell us that these are the critical issues that need to be addressed within the workplace, both the private sector and the public sector. But these are issues I would invite you to frame if you were to embark upon an investigation into maladministration in the public sector in relation to gender inequality in the workplace for women public sector employees. Consider these critical issues. The gender wage gap. Do we have equal remuneration for work of equal value? Women's representation, advancement, and retention in the workplace. Are we creating opportunities for women to be brought into positions of leadership, to benefit from advancement and development opportunities within the workplace, and to move on to senior positions within the workplace? Issues of maternity and parental leave continue to have an impact on women's ability to participate more fully and optimally within the workplace, and the bedeviling issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. So I would invite you, please, to flag those issues and investigate them within the public sector within your countries. But however, when we look at where are women in the workplace, both within the public sector and the private sector, and we look at the gendered profile of women's employment, typically and globally, again, research tells us that women are occupying low wage positions, low status positions, and temporary and insecure positions, part-time positions within the workplace as compared to men. Also, women predominate within atypical forms of employment, and particularly from a developing nation perspective, and South Africa is no different from our counterparts in the South. Women predominate in these vulnerable categories of work: casual labor, temporary, part-time, seasonal workers, women workers on farm, home-based workers, outsourced, the informal economy, domestic work, and precarious forms of work such as informal economy work, where there is no social security, and there are limited access and availability to workplace protections and to labor remedies that are available to the counterparts within the private sector. And I see I've only got 2 minutes left, so I'll move along. I've shared with you, these are some statistics. This is South Africa's picture, which I won't dwell on in detail, noting that we're with an international community today. But there you can see, despite our being 51% of the population and now 46.8% of the employed population, women are significantly underrepresented in our economically active profile positions across all the occupational levels. And there you see the statistics: 26.9% of top management, 37% of senior management, white women overrepresented for their racial profile group within the workplace, and persons with disabilities. Women with disabilities, and predominantly Black women with disabilities, are the least represented. We can't even hit our 2% target in South Africa. The gender wage gap persists in South Africa. There it is, we earn 24% less than our male counterparts. Have a look here. There is a difference in South Africa in terms of the public sector and the private sector. We're doing better in terms of gender transformation in the public sector. Women comprise 35% of top management in the public sector, and yet only 25% in the private sector. And you can see how poorly we're faring in the private sector. We're only 17% of CEOs and chairs of the boards of our Johannesburg Stock Exchange listed enterprises. What are the drivers for inequality in the workplace? It's recruitment, promotion, and training. Again, something to flag. If we're looking at women's underrepresentation in the workplace, men, white and Indian men within South Africa, continue to be privileged and to be advantaged by the recruitment, promotion, and training directed to their levels of employment. This is despite, just to remind us of International Labour Organization conventions pertaining to equal pay for work of equal value. concerning vocational training and opportunities to promote equality of opportunity in the workplace, and despite the more recently adopted Convention on Violence and Harassment, requiring states to take measures to address sexual harassment and violence within the workplace. South Africa has drilled that down, those international commitments, to a slate of domestic legislation. I won't repeat those. Dr. Matutu made reference to many of those measures. We have a very progressive employment equity legislation that requires of employers, state employers as well, to put in place action plans for transformation, and to align and focus on the policies that are required to underpin and drive a transformation agenda. And I wish to leave with you then, and for our deliberations this morning, the particular roles that the Ombudsman and officers of the Ombudsman could play in this regard. We have a mandate to investigate, report, and remedy improper conduct in state affairs. And I would like to suggest that this sector consider as improper conduct in state affairs, state failures, state institutional failure to implement our obligations in terms of these international conventions and domestic legislation. We're not, as state entities, implementing within our own government departments, government's own commitments and obligations. And I propose that those administrative deficiencies need to be addressed and investigated, particularly looking at women's representation, as well as those additional instances of discrimination, sexual harassment, and gender-based violence within the workplace. One of the readings that I've left with you shares some recommendations on what measures can be implemented to support and advance women within the workplace, from supporting work-life balance, building a supportive culture within the workplace, looking at the recruitment and leadership development processes, looking at the benefits and support mechanisms and structures within organizations, but above all, embedding transformation and empowerment as a leadership responsibility within the workplace. So, Honorable Mumba, apologies for rushing slightly to the end. It's amazing how quickly time goes, but thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you so much for your presentation. There we are. We've been challenged by empirical evidence all over the world, how much percentages women are behind in all forms of employment, especially dealing with education, health, and opportunities. And thank you for pointing out that in the public sector, institutions themselves, they are not conforming to international conventions, which you have pointed out, for instance, from the International Labour Organizations, and even where governments have facilitated such implementation by localizing those conventions to national laws, we still find that we are failing to implement them. So those are challenges to the Ombudsman institutions to deal with, and we all understand that if you leave out women in the workplace, in the health sector, in the education sector, there will be no balance in terms of development, because we need gender equity in every aspect, in the political sector and all the other aspects you pointed out. Thank you so much for the statistics, and thank you so much for the challenges you have posed through your address. Thank you. Yes, we'll move on. I may just add that those with questions touching Dr. Janine Hicks should wait until our last presentation, then we'll get on to the questions. Thank you very much. We now move on to the second speaker, Honorable Nachelle Ramirez Hernandez. She's a seasonal human rights advocate with over 40 years of experience in Mexico. She currently serves as the president of the International Ombudsman Institute, or IOI, since May 2024, and has been the president of the Human Rights Commission of Mexico City since 2017, re-elected for a second term until 2025. She holds advanced qualifications in education research, teaching, practice, and planning, as well as specialized training in local government, security, justice, and child labor policies. Her leadership in the Ombudsman system includes roles such as third vice president of the Global Alliance of Local Ombudsmen, coordinator of the Network on Children and Adolescents of the Ibero-American Federation of Ombudsmen, FIO, and former president of the Mexican Federation of Public Human Rights Bodies. In the international arena, she has been involved with the Organization of Ibero-American States for Education, Science, and Culture, and founded key organizations like Ririki Intervention Social, SC, and the Alliance for the Rights of Children and Adolescents. Her academic contributions include over 50 research projects and publications on social issues, including works on human rights, migration, and intergenerational democracy. That is a chapter for Dr. Hernandez, and we look forward to your presentation because already from your CV, we can see that some of the contributions already touch on the topic of today. How do we celebrate gender equity in our institutions today? Thank you so much. Please, welcome.
Hola, muy buenos días desde México. Quisiera saludar especialmente a las organizadoras de este evento, agradecerles el convocarnos a estar aquí, en especial a la honorable Antonia Florbela de Jesús Rocha Araujo, Ombudsperson de Angola, y a Florence Mumba, Ombudsperson de Zambia, y a todos los defensores que están enlazados en esta conferencia. Quisiera ver si podemos compartir mi presentación. ¿La tienen por ahí? ¿O quieren que haga yo el intento de compartirla por aquí? No la veo.
You can go ahead with your presentation.
Can you show it for me, or I have to bring it?
Hello? Yes, you can go ahead with your presentation as you have prepared it.
Let me try because I am it's 2 in the morning. It's 2 in the morning here in Mexico.
Oh. Yes,
and I'm in my home, and I am not so.
We can flag it for you if
I am not looking well here. Please, if you want to, if you help me with this, it will be great.
Yes, we can hear you. You can just proceed.
Lo que pasa es que ya no la veo, ¿verdad? Ya no veo la presentación yo. Let me try to escape from this because I am.
Frankie, can you pick up that, please?
Yes, Honorable Mumba, she's trying to flag a presentation. She having some few difficulties.
You have the presentation? Can you show it for me or not?
Yes, I do have. I can show it for you, but you will tell me when to go next.
Okay, please.
Yeah.
Now, beginning now.
All right.
Yes, please.
There you go.
Perfect. Lo que voy a abordar el día de hoy es el papel de los organismos públicos de derechos humanos en la lucha contra los prejuicios de género. Y van a ver a lo largo de la presentación que muchas de las cosas que oímos en la primera presentación van a tener sentido de contexto, de explicación a partir de lo que llamamos los prejuicios de género y que de hecho son reconocidos como parte importante de abordar en la Convención sobre Eliminación de todas las formas de discriminación contra la mujer, la CEDAW, como ustedes saben, ese es uno de los principales marcos en términos de el cumplimiento de los derechos de las mujeres en el mundo. Es una convención ratificada por 189 países y solamente no la han suscrito el Vaticano, Irán, Niue, Somalia, Sudán y Tonga. El resto de países del mundo han ratificado esta convención, que en su artículo 5 plantea la obligación de los estados partes para modificar patrones socioculturales de conductas de hombres y mujeres con miras a alcanzar la eliminación de los perjuicios de género y lo que deriva de estos perjuicios. ¿Qué son los perjuicios de género? Los perjuicios de género son ideas generalizadas o preconcebidas sobre los atributos y las características a los roles que poseen o deberían desempeñar las mujeres o los hombres. Básicamente agravan y agravados y cruzados, los estereotipos tienen un impacto negativo y desproporcionado, específicamente en ciertos grupos de mujeres, y ya lo compartían en la presentación pasada, cuando hablamos de esta o sea, de estos brechas, cuando hablamos, por ejemplo, de mujeres afro, pero que además tienen discapacidad. En el caso de mi región, cuando hablamos de mujeres indígenas, y en donde estos prejuicios con estas combinaciones tienen un impacto desproporcionado. Básicamente los prejuicios de género aumentan la discriminación y por lo tanto perpetúan las desigualdades. Para un poco darle fundamento numérico o de investigaciones cuantitativas a esto que les estoy diciendo, quisiera compartir lo que es el índice de normas sociales de género 2023. Este índice se ha venido recogiendo desde el 2005 en 91 países del mundo, tiene sus resultados, digamos, presentan un escenario de todas las regiones y abordan básicamente 4 dimensiones de lo que son, digamos, las normas que están relacionados con perjuicios. La dimensión política, la dimensión educativa, la dimensión que tiene que ver con la integridad física y la dimensión que tiene que ver con la dimensión económica. En general, el resultado de 2005 no ha variado mucho, como ustedes lo ven, en el porcentaje de población del 2005 a 2009 que tenía prejuicios de género era el 86.5%, y en el último levantamiento que se hizo en el 2019 y que presenta los datos del 2023, en el 2023 el porcentaje solamente había disminuido al 84.6%. La siguiente, por favor. ¿Me pueden pasar la siguiente diapositiva? Ok. Como les decía, el índice de normas sociales cubre 4 dimensiones que hablan y que son las áreas donde se señala que se enfrenta discriminación y violencia sistemática hacia niñas y mujeres en el mundo. La primera dimensión es la dimensión política, ¿no? En donde 6 de cada 10 personas en el mundo tienen y expresan expresiones de prejuicios que tienen que ver con estas dimensiones. Por ejemplo, 6 de cada 10 en el mundo, pero vayamos revisando algunos indicadores. En el caso de la afirmación de que no es esencial para la democracia que las mujeres y los hombres tengan los mismos derechos, este porcentaje se incrementa al 73%. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? 7 de 10 personas en el mundo piensan que no es esencial para la democracia que las mujeres tengamos los mismos derechos que los hombres. El 49%, o sea, casi la mitad, que los hombres son mejores líderes políticos que las mujeres, ¿no? En la esfera educativa es la esfera donde más hemos avanzado en el mundo en alrededor de quitar los perjuicios de género, de avanzar sobre los perjuicios de género. Esta dimensión, estamos hablando de que tiene elementos solamente de 3 por cada 10, 3 de cada 10 personas en el mundo piensan que hay en esta dimensión cuestiones que tienen que ver con perjuicios. Un ejemplo es los estudios universitarios son más importantes para los hombres que para las mujeres, eso piensan el 30%, pero si vamos al resto de indicadores, estos van a estar jugando mucho mejor que en las otras 3 dimensiones que aborda el estudio. Es quizá exactamente en la educación donde más hemos avanzado exactamente el eliminar los perjuicios de género. La que sigue, por favor. La dimensión económica, estamos igual, 6 de cada 10 tienen perjuicios en la dimensión económica alrededor de perjuicios de género. Algunos indicadores son los hombres tienen más derecho a acceder a un trabajo en comparación con las mujeres, el 46%. Los hombres son mejores jefes que las mujeres, el 43% de las personas piensan eso, naturalmente basadas en normas y perjuicios. Y esto, por hablar de algunos de los indicadores que nos compartió la ponente anterior, pues se explica muchos también de ellos en estos preceptos. Esta brecha que aún tenemos en ingreso económico, en el trabajo, en las posiciones del trabajo, en que las mujeres ganan menos por trabajo igual, el que ahora que padecemos todavía los estragos de la pandemia de COVID, vemos que la brecha se incrementó más en hombres que en mujeres y todo esto tiene entre bases estos perjuicios que permanecen alrededor también de esta dimensión económica. Y finalmente la dimensión de integridad física, también 6 de cada 10 personas con perjuicios, el 25% de los hombres, de las personas piensan que los hombres pueden ejercer violencia en perjuicio de sus mujeres, eso decía, está bien que lo hagan, y que las mujeres no tienen agencia para decidir, por ejemplo, sobre sus derechos sexuales y reproductivos. Eso es una creencia que está en el 58% de las personas en el mundo. Estos son, digamos, resultados globales. Veamos un poco cómo se comporta este indicador dependiendo de las regiones del mundo. La que sigue, por favor. Y tenemos aquí ejemplos de mayores y menores porcentajes en perjuicio por razón de género en la región en estos últimos indicadores. Entonces, tomando en cuenta primero aquí a nuestros anfitriones, ¿no? Tenemos que los países que tienen o presentan mayores índices de prevalencia de perjuicios, pues son Libia, Mali, Nigeria, Egipto y Ruanda, y con casi el 100% de perjuicios de género instalados en las lógicas de la sociedad, y los países con mejores, con porcentajes que se están moviendo, pero que de todos modos nos colocan también junto con América Latina en posiciones todavía de mucho trabajo de transformación sociocultural, pues son Morocco, Kenia, Tunisia, Zambia y Sudáfrica. Como verán, sí hay una discrepancia entre los porcentajes en las regiones. En el caso de Europa, por ejemplo, la la Inglaterra, Netherlands y Alemania tienen porcentajes bajos han transformado culturalmente bastante lo que implica los perjuicios y sus indicadores son más bajos. Los indicadores más bajos están en Asia Pacífico, en Nueva Zelanda y en Australia específicamente. Y después, como se darán cuenta, para ver la desigualdad regional que todos conocemos al interior de nuestras regiones también, la brecha entre lo que pasa en Nueva Zelanda y en Australia con el resto de países de Asia Pacífico es grandísima, ¿no? En el doble de las situaciones. Como se darán cuenta también, México, mi país que está valorado en Norteamérica, también refleja esta discrepancia, mientras la mitad más o menos de las personas de Canadá y Estados Unidos que están en mi misma región tienen perjuicios de género. En México estamos en los indicadores más o menos muy parecidos al de ustedes. Es decir, tenemos todavía muchos retos que avanzar sobre estos perjuicios de género. Lo que tenemos la que sigue, por favor, lo que tenemos que considerar es que esto no nada más es un problema, digamos, que tenga que ver con cuestiones nada más de que se necesite el cambio cultural porque es importante que cambiemos o no. Lo importante aquí es siempre considerar que cuando estamos hablando de derechos humanos de las mujeres, estos perjuicios de género impactan exactamente en los indicadores de desigualdad, ¿no? Hay una relación en la permanencia de los perjuicios y la permanencia y el establecimiento de estos indicadores de desigualdad con los cuales nos compartió la ponente pasada, pero que no son nada más de la región africana, no son nada más de un país, sino son lamentablemente de la mayoría de las partes del mundo. Si no comprendemos que tenemos que abordar los prejuicios para poder también abordar parte del problema de lo que deriva en las desigualdades y en la discrepancia en el cumplimiento de los derechos de las mujeres, pues estaríamos, digamos, creo yo, teniendo o mirando solamente una parte del problema y no llegando a fondo a lo que tendríamos que estar trabajando. En este caso, cómo podemos desmontar los perjuicios de género es fundamental para atender la realidad tanto institucional como social que viven las mujeres, porque los perjuicios plantean sesgos, ¿no? Presentan lo que llamamos categorías sospechosas en procesos de discriminación e impiden que las mujeres no nada más actúen en nombre de sus propios valores e intereses, sino que no logren la igualdad y por lo tanto el cumplimiento de sus derechos. Y aquí estamos hablando de las dos grandes rutas de los derechos de las mujeres. Por un lado es la igualdad sustantiva y por otro lado la vida libre de violencia. En estos dos carriles es como alcanzamos y tenemos que trabajar sobre el cumplimiento de sus derechos. En la parte, digamos, ¿qué tendríamos que estar trabajando en la parte institucional? ¿En qué tipo de reformas para poder transformar estos prejuicios? Pues básicamente en formación y capacitación tenemos que promover que en la parte institucional haya una fuerte componente de capacitación y de formación. Tenemos que seguir trabajando sobre la incorporación de la perspectiva de género en las reformas institucionales y tenemos también que tener políticas fiscales que lo que hagan y tengan esta perspectiva de género para poder realizar transformaciones al respecto. En la parte social, lo primero es reconocer que existen estos perjuicios. O sea, tenemos que reconocer que tenemos un contexto social, como lo vimos en en la presentación del índice con un alto componente todavía social de perjuicios, ¿no? Y en esa lógica tendríamos que trabajar en la parte social, de entrada reconociéndolo, ¿no? Lo otro, garantizando la representación de las mujeres que están subrepresentadas, como ya lo vimos, en todos los ámbitos, básicamente derivados de estos perjuicios y estas desigualdades, y promoviendo el cambio social, promoviendo que estos prejuicios sean transformados, se deriven en cambios sustanciales. La que sigue, por favor. Específicamente, y con eso voy cerrando, hablaremos en este contexto, cuál es el rol de los ombudsperson, de las oficinas de defensorías de derechos humanos en el mundo, estas instituciones que tenemos como mandatos en general, los derivados de los principios de París del 93 y de los recientes principios de Venecia en el 2017. Como verán, el rol de las oficinas de ombudsperson es fundamental en la transformación cultural, normativa y de política pública para la erradicación de los perjuicios en razón de género, porque tienen la capacidad de incidir en ambas esferas: la esfera institucional, la esfera que requiere de reformas institucionales, y también en la esfera de la transformación social. Estos mandatos que nos plantean los principios de París, entre otros, es presentar dictámenes, recomendaciones, propuestas e informes sobre todas las cuestiones relativas a la protección y promoción de los derechos humanos, en disposiciones de carácter legislativo y administrativo, en situaciones de violación a derechos humanos, en materia de la situación nacional de los derechos humanos, para promover y asegurar que la legislación, los reglamentos y las prácticas nacionales se armonicen con los instrumentos internacionales, alentar la ratificación de esos instrumentos y contribuir y cooperar en la enseñanza, la investigación y la promoción. Es decir, los propios principios nos están marcando, como nos están señalando claramente el mandato que tenemos tanto en la esfera institucional como en la esfera social. En el caso de los principios de Venecia, retoma esto y además hace mucho énfasis en trabajar sobre aspectos de mala administración y de la protección y promoción de los derechos humanos y las libertades fundamentales, entre las que se encuentran naturalmente los derechos de las mujeres. ¿Qué tenemos, digamos, también en nuestro papel de fortaleza? Pues tenemos instituciones como la que hoy nos acoge en términos regionales, pero también en términos mundiales, el Instituto Internacional del Ombudsperson, al cual pertenecemos la mayoría de las organizadoras y la buena parte de quienes nos están oyendo. Integra casi 200 instituciones independientes de ombudsperson en el mundo, y creo que considerar esta visión regional y mundial también nos permite tener y desarrollar acciones que tengan más impacto a nivel mundial. Como ven en lo que les compartí, esto no es una situación de una región, esto no es un reto para un país, es un reto para todos los países del mundo, y básicamente porque así nos lo están señalando no nada más los indicadores de desigualdad, sino los indicadores sobre prejuicios que son previos a poder entender por qué tenemos esa situación. La que sigue, por favor. El rol de las oficinas de Ombudsman, entonces, se divide en acciones de promoción y en acciones de protección, ¿no? Las acciones de promoción incluyen el papel activo de divulgación y educación en derechos humanos, pues a través de material informativo, de nuestras páginas web, de realizar talleres, capacitaciones a otras personas del servicio público y también para la comunidad si es que tenemos y desarrollamos convenios, articulaciones con otras instituciones del Estado para poder promover estos aspectos de divulgación y educación. Es decir, parte de nuestras acciones de promoción tendrían y tienen que estar enfocadas a trabajar sobre la erradicación de los perjuicios de género, y hacerlo a través de la divulgación y educación es hacerlo en favor de la promoción de los derechos humanos. La otra, pues la cooperación, como les decía, hay que estar cooperando con otras agencias, tanto de la sociedad civil como del Estado, para poder desarrollar políticas públicas que permitan abordar esta esfera institucional de cambio de la cual hablábamos para erradicar perjuicios de género. ¿No? Hay que desmantelar estos perjuicios también desde las políticas. Tenemos legislaciones que lo que hacen no nada más no es erradicarlos, sino sostener estos prejuicios a través de esas políticas o a través de esas legislaciones. Tenemos que seguir haciendo incidencia. No lo podemos hacer solos, lo tenemos que hacer cooperando con las agencias del Estado y con las organizaciones de la sociedad civil. En este caso también se incluye a la academia, ¿no? Cuando hablamos de que uno de los aspectos que tendríamos que hacer al respecto tiene que ver con promover, acercarnos a investigaciones con perspectiva de género, ¿no? A la academia, que generalmente es la que genera este tipo de investigaciones, y nosotros en la medida de lo posible hacerlo y estarlos acompañando. Una parte fundamental cuando hablamos de promoción es no perder de vista que tenemos que trabajar con los grupos de atención prioritaria, estos grupos mayormente discriminados y que básicamente, por lo tanto, son los que mayormente sufren los efectos de los prejuicios, como son los niñas, las adolescentes, para poder desde en esos momentos empezar a romper estos prejuicios que vamos incorporando desde que vamos incorporando nuestra visión de género, cómo nos concebimos como mujeres, cómo se conciben los varones como varones, etcétera, ¿no? La otro carril es el carril de la protección, que también tenemos como mandato y que también hay mucho que hacer en términos de esta erradicación de prejuicios, ¿no? Lo primero es el desarrollar capacidad de interlocución desde la independencia frente a otros poderes. Es decir, tenemos que, para poder incidir en la protección, tenemos que también seguir trabajando sobre una de las características principales de nuestros organismos, establecidas igual y desarrolladas en los principios de París y de Venecia, que es nuestra independencia. ¿Por qué? Porque eso nos va a dar un mayor poder de interlocución y poder estar frente a, digamos, políticas gubernamentales que no estén caminando sobre esta ruta. Lo siguiente es la atención directa a las víctimas de derechos humanos. Tendremos que seguir y tenemos que seguir acercándonos más en nuestro trabajo a las víctimas de violaciones a derechos humanos, y mientras estas violaciones no sean graves, tenemos que trabajar mucho sobre los procesos de restitución inmediata de derechos y no nada más sobre nuestras capacidades, que las tenemos, y nuestras atribuciones para emitir recomendaciones. Y en este caso, hablar mucho y generar mucho medidas de no repetición. Es decir, las medidas de repetición son todo lo que tendríamos que estar recomendando a los estados con relación a las políticas que tendrían que generarse para que estas situaciones que se vuelven estructurales no se repitan. ¿No? Es importante también analizar casos a partir de garantizar herramientas de análisis de derechos humanos, ¿no? Es decir, tenemos que irnos transformando nosotros también, y eso va mucho con estas 4 cosas que con eso voy a finalizar, tienen que ver con el trabajo, sobre todo cuando trabajamos con mujeres, y pues naturalmente el análisis de normas, regulaciones y políticas públicas con una perspectiva de género establecida ahí. Entonces, tenemos 4 elementos que desde mi punto de vista son transversales para nuestro trabajo y lo que podemos hacer alrededor de los prejuicios de género, de la desigualdad de género y de la violación de los derechos humanos, específicamente de las mujeres. Y uno es en que nuestras acciones y nuestro trabajo tiene que tener un sentido de perspectiva de género y un análisis interseccional, ¿no? Es decir, no es lo mismo ser mujer y tener una discapacidad, no es lo mismo ser mujer indígena y no serlo, no es lo mismo tener el ser una niña que ser una adulta mujer. Es decir, tenemos que tener análisis interseccional en nuestros programas, en nuestras acciones de protección, en nuestras acciones de promoción, y sobre todo también esto que es la perspectiva de género, que tiene que ver sencillamente con cómo nos tenemos en todo momento que poner esos lentes que ahora dicen son los lentes violeta, ¿no? Para poder analizar el contexto. Lo siguiente es el trabajo de proximidad. Tenemos que seguir haciendo esfuerzos por trabajar mucho más cercanos a las personas, mucho más cercanas a las mujeres, acercar nuestro trabajo más próximo a ellas, y esto se puede hacer de diferentes maneras. Muchas veces depende de nuestra situación, de la cantidad de personas que tengamos. Quizá no lo podamos hacer directamente, lo tenemos que hacer a través de la cooperación con otras agencias, con alianzas con las universidades, con las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, pero también con otras figuras, como puede ser desarrollar elementos de nuestras páginas web, de nuestros enlaces para tener más proximidad, que la gente pueda acercarse más a nosotros. El análisis de contexto, muy importante cuando hablamos de la situación de los derechos de las mujeres. El análisis de contexto nos permite saber que cualquier cuestión que está pasando alrededor del mundo de las mujeres tiene que tener un análisis exactamente de cuál es el contexto que vivimos las mujeres. Y creo que esta presentación lo que intentaba hacer era poner el enfoque en términos de que los prejuicios son una parte fundamental para entender y para erradicar las desigualdades. Y en este caso, el análisis de contexto implica exactamente el siempre tener en cuenta que hay estos prejuicios que están presentes en la sociedad y que por lo tanto parte de lo que vemos de violaciones o de seguimiento al cumplimiento de derechos de las mujeres tiene que ver con estos prejuicios. Hay que hacer análisis de contexto para poder interviniendo de parte con este enfoque de derechos humanos, y finalmente todo lo que tiene que ver con justicia restaurativa, con saber que tampoco podemos tardarnos mucho para atender a las personas y tenemos que hacerlo de manera más o menos inmediata. Esta es la final y con eso pues estaríamos esperando sus comentarios. Muchísimas gracias.
Much, Honorable Nacheli Ramirez Hernandez. You have really challenged the Ombudsman institutions in the analysis of your work, beginning with the normal biases we have in our communities. And I'm actually ashamed that Zambia is one of the worst countries when it comes to a very high percentage of bias. And you've challenged us on having things like principles, Paris principles, Venice principles, and other international literature for CEDAW, which we are not actually implementing in our work as ombudspersons. So we feel challenged. We've been given direction by your presentation, and thank you very much. I'm sure that we shall have a number of questions related to your address at the end of our session, and I wish to thank you very much. I call upon our next speaker, Ms. Lwandisa Zaula, who is a dedicated professional with dynamic academic background, holding a Bachelor of Laws, a Bachelor of Social Science, as well as honors degree in anthropology from the University of Fort Hare. With a passion for justice and social equity, she just falls into what the last speaker has presented. She has combined the principles of legal studies and social science to address complex societal issues effectively. In her role as a portfolio coordinator at the DMC, Ms. Zaula showcased exceptional project management and organizational skills. She oversaw various clients' portfolios, coordinating team efforts to ensure that projects were delivered on time and met clients' expectations. As an outreach coordinator at the Public Protector there in South Africa, Ms. Zaula harnesses her interpersonal skills to foster relationships between the Public Protector of South Africa and the community. She organized numerous educational workshops, public awareness campaigns aimed at increasing access to the services offered by the Office of the Public Protector. With passion for advocacy and dedication to professional excellence, Ms. Zaula continues to seek to blend her legal expertise and commitment to community outreach. She believes in the power of collaboration to drive positive change and is excited to leverage her skills in future endeavors. Welcome, Ms. Zaula, to our discussion. Please go ahead and present your thoughts and your challenges to the Ombudsman institution.
And thank you, Chairperson, and a big thank you to the IOC team for inviting me to this webinar. Honorable Mumba, fellow panelists, and the audience that may be joining us all over the world, I'd like to extend my greetings. Ensuring gender equality, the role of Ombudsman, is a significant theme for this year's Women Month. And as part of the larger theme of this webinar, my contribution caters around Ombuds Office's best practice and case studies. It gives me great pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to present to you this important topic. Gender equality. The world's potential is embodied in half of its population, which is made up of women and of course girls. Now, part of the basic human right, it is then apart from being a basic human right, gender equality is also crucial to attain worldwide. However, regretfully, more work still needs to be done before we can realize and attain the opportunity for both males and females. In the various manifestations of gender-based violence, ensuring that women have equal access to high quality healthcare, education, financial resources, political and professional involvement are therefore of fundamental importance. Now, I know that one of the panelists have already gone through the statistics that might affect gender inequalities on a global scale. So I think I'm going to pass that slide. And then I'll zoom directly into the role of Ombudsman. So in order for us as Ombudsmen to realize what work the office needs to contribute towards equality, we need to understand what our mandate is. As Ombuds offices were independent entities that investigate complaints against government agencies, promote accountability, transparency, and justice. Our unique position allows us to address systemic issues and advocate for marginalized voices, such as the woman and the girl child. Now, a recent example of our contribution as a Public Protector South Africa is the release of our recent report in the gender-based violence report. I will elaborate on this report later on in my presentation. In addition to looking into cases that are brought before us that fall within our purview, we also act as a mechanism for accountability, following the redress of injustice suffered by individuals, as well as the resolution of structural systemic problems and those that need to be addressed in order to guarantee communities adequate access to public resources. When maladministration appears to have common cause or underlying tendency, the PPSA in particular is empowered to launch an independent investigation or own initiative. We do this in terms of our section 6, 4, and 5 of the PPSA Act. This one permits own initiative investigation within the government in all spheres and the latter for a parastyle and governmental entities. This gives assurance that government institutions are compelled to recognize and identify issues and stop injustices from reoccurring. Now, my case study was conducted primarily in the Public Protector of South Africa as an Ombuds office. And I've looked into the perspective of the work of the office, that is what the office has done when confronted with complaints from women who have fallen victims of gender inequality. I've also looked in contrast at 2 other Ombuds offices, namely the Ombudspersons for Gender Equality, which is in Croatia, as well as the Ombuds for Equality in Finland, to determine what work that they do irrespective of gender equality and what we can actually learn from them as the Ombuds in South Africa or in Africa. Now, the PPSA mandate, the Public Protector Act 23 of 1994 actually gives us the authority to look into the cases of maladministration involving any level of government, abuse of unwarranted use of power, unfair or other improper behavior, or excessive delays by those carrying out public duties in South Africa. In addition to this, the Office of the Public Protector has actually contributed immensely to the Service Charter for Victims of Crime. The primary goal of the Charter is to end secondary victimization in the criminal justice systems, and this guarantees the victims are kept at the center of the criminal justice, not the other way around. Now, in my cases, looking into the work that the Public Protector has done, I've actually cited 3 cases that have highlighted the issues that still perpetuate gender inequality in the country as well as at the globe. First case is the GBV report, which I've already stated that you've recently released. So what had happened in this, what sparked the GBV report was that the case involved a Miss Cortia, who in June 2020 was murdered by her ex-partner. So what had happened is that before she was actually murdered, she approached the magistrate court in Bellville to actually ask for a protection order against the ex-husband or the ex-spouse. According to the evidence that was gathered, she was actually murdered by the same person that she was seeking a protection order against 2 days after the court had actually turned her away. So the court actually didn't do any justice to assist and protect this lady. The investigation emanates from the administrative challenges faced by the public on a daily basis, particularly women and the children in the South African justice system. And then another case that I actually looked at, it's an ongoing systemic investigation of maladministration deficiencies against the functionaries of administrative court regarding the handling of child maintenance issues. So what PPSA has done is, over the years, they've received a number of complaints they received a number of complaints over the course of the years around systemic failures on the part of the magistrate court's functionaries and in the way in which they actually process their maintenance. And amongst these allegations or complaints that we would receive was that functionaries were actually delaying in finalizing matters timelessly, or they were actually delaying in tracing against persons who needed to pay maintenance. Also, some of the issues that we found was that there was inadequate measures in payment of maintenances. So, for an example, even if the persons were traced, there are no mechanism measures put in place to ensure that the monies or the maintenance money is paid timelessly and consistently to support the children. due to the ostensible system administrative failure by the functionaries to comply with the Constitution and the legal obligations in dealing with maintenance issues, the public protector has then deemed it crucial to conduct a systemic investigations in order to find solutions in resolving systemic issues that are relating to the issues that I've just elaborated on. One of the things that we should actually note with regards to child maintenance is that child maintenance actually serves as a critical mechanism that promotes gender equality for women by providing financial security, in encouraging equitable parental responsibility, and empowering women to pursue education and employment opportunities. Collectively, these factors actually contribute to reducing gender disparities in the income and the social status of a woman. The last case that I've cited is actually it's also an ongoing systemic investigation that looks into the holistic health sector of South Africa. So here, what we actually look into is the deficiency of our health system within the country. It also investigate.
Sorry.
This investigation is also actually triggered by an article that the PPSA came across from a particular radio website, where it was highlighted that pregnant women were actually sleeping on benches. Mm-hmm. The PPSA then saw it fit to launch their own initiative investigation, and they actually visited a number of hospitals across the country, and they actually found similar trends. That there was a shortage of staff, pregnant women were sleeping on the floor, and a whole lot of other issues that emanated from this investigation. And now looking at the contrast, because remember I've said that I've also looked at other ombuds offices. So in contrast, while us as the PPS as an ombudsman, we have limited jurisdiction power to directly investigate gender-related matters. We have a Commission of Gender Equality, which is also a Chapter 9 institution that will work hand in hand with this commission. Has a direct mandate to investigate gender-related issues. However, in contrast, there's the two ombudsmen that I'm going to speak about. They actually have a direct mandate in the handling of matters that are related to gender equality issues. I've looked at the first one. It's the Ombudsperson for Gender Equality that is in Croatia. So what the Croatian government has done is they've appointed the first gender equality ombudsperson in 2003. The Croatian government passed a new Gender Equality Act in 2008, which gave the Gender Equality Ombudsperson the role of an impartial authority tasked to address discrimination in the areas of gender. And that is something that as a public protector or an ombudsman that we don't have. It's a power that we don't have, or that is limited to us. Independent in her action, the Gender Equality Ombudsperson keeps an eye on the application of gender equality laws and other gender equality regulations, and she submits reports to the Croatian Parliament on a yearly basis. Now, looking at some of the functions of this ombuds, they receive complaints from natural persons and or legal entities regarding discrimination in the areas of gender equality. Secondly, they provide assistance to the natural person or legal persons to file complaints of sexual discriminations when instituting legal proceedings. They also take steps to investigate individual complaints prior the legal proceedings. They also conduct, they do mediation. So, but mediation is done at the consent of the parties that are involved. And one thing that was actually triggering to me is that they are data driven. So they collect data and they analyze the data of this of the cases of sexual discrimination, and they produce reports that that gives direction as to what needs to happen in terms of trying to eradicate the sexual discrimination against women. And then looking at the Ombuds of Equity, which is based in Finland, their primary mandate is to oversee adherence to the Act on Equality between women and men. So when it comes to the issues of gender identity, and gender expression, the Ombud is empowered. The Ombudsman's power encompasses both the promotion of equality and the fight against discrimination. Guidance and advice are the Ombud's primary means of task fulfilling. So their central role is actually to give guidance and to advise on policies and policies that are related to equity between men and women. Part of their functions, or some of their functions, is to make recommendations on claims of discrimination. They also organize training, and they advise and they do capacity building on matters that are related to their mandate, of course. They also advise government on the development and the adoption of amendments of laws and policies that are related to their mandate. And they monitor national laws and policies from an equality perspective. Now, before I conclude, I would like to just briefly give you what we've learned, the best practices from the ombuds that I've actually alluded on about. I'll start with the PPSA. Now, the Office of the Public Protector of South Africa has produced reports through own initiative that highlight findings that are related to gender-based issues, which can inform the public and stakeholders about the systemic problems and the solutions or potential solutions that is needed to address the gender equality issues in the country. The office also monitors how effective government agencies are implementing gender-related policies and programs. This oversight ensures that accountability in the areas needing improvement. Through their outreach and advocacy program, the office collaborates with civic societies, NPOs, churches, and other government institutions to educate the public about their rights and how they can address gender-based issues more effectively. So the Public Protector has got 9 offices across the country, and each country has got an office and has got outreach officers who ensures that where they are, they join and they collaborate with civic societies and these governmental and NPOs and churches to ensure that the work of the public protectors is accessible in all of these provinces. Another best practice is the office conducts targeted campaigns for women and children, as well as the vulnerable groups, to address challenges faced in the societies. So to this end, this has been incorporated in our annual performance plan as a target. So as of this current financial year, the Public Protector has made it mandatory to ensure that they conduct targeted campaigns to ensure that they touch the lives of women, and they touch the lives of children, and they address the issues of people in the vulnerable groups, people living with disabilities. And they've made this one of their targets. As part of our digitization strategy, we as a Public Protector will be launching a self-service portal where our services can be accessible at the fingertips of our complainants. So we're actually taking our services to the people because we understand our complainants, we understand that not everyone has got money to catch transport, to go and lodge a complaint into our offices or send an email or have money to call. So it is for that reason that We're launching our self-service portal so that people can go onto their phone, they can lodge complaint, or they can see the status of their complaint using their phone. Lastly, collaboration with institutions of higher learning is what we have done. We've also in the process of signing MOUs with Law Clinic. In the plans, so why we're doing this is so that we can refer some of the matters, legal matters that you don't have jurisdiction of to these law clinics. Looking into some of the best practices from the Ombuds person of gender equity. These are some of the best practices that we have seen. The ombudsperson of the gender equity is actually data-driven. So in that way, so they collect data, like I've already said, and they analyze the statistics, and on the case of sexual discrimination. So I think we can learn a lot from these ombudsmen, because we need to start actually analyzing and collecting our data, so that so that our data or our research or our investigation can be informed actually by what we see or what complaints are coming into the office. They further conduct independent survey concerning discrimination, publishing independent reports, and exchanging available information with corresponding European bodies. So they exchange with other bodies. They conduct independent surveys. They don't wait for them to be told what to do. They are actually proactive in this data and data sharing and information sharing with other bodies and other countries. Where a complaint is lodged against another party, they look into the mediation with the consent of the party before they can go to courts. So they don't rush into going to court. They actually sit down and they look in the best ways possible as to how they can deal with the complaints and come up with the best solution for both parties. Some of the recommendations that I have for ombuds, based on the studies that I've done, or the information that I've gathered, is that ombudsman needs to promote gender equality in the workplace. So they say charity begins at home. So that's where we need to start. We need to ensure that we promote gender equality within our offices. We develop policies that speaks to gender and policies that address gender equality within our offices, so that we are better equipped to assist people out there that may come to us and ask for assistance. We also need to be data-driven in our investigation. We can start by identifying and unpacking issues that affect vulnerable groups, especially women. That data should be collected and should be able to provide the nature of the complaints. Another recommendation that I can add is that ombuds are recommended to hold summits. Can hold summits where issues of gender equalities are addressed, and how the ombudsman's offices can, or what role they can play despite their limited jurisdiction in relation to gender equality related matters. So maybe the summits that are related to this topic can maybe pave the way as to how we can better, assist into ensuring or realizing the equality of gender in the world. We also need to develop and monitor evaluation processes that monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of our outreach programs. We do a lot of programs, but sometimes we don't get feedback. So feedback is very important. We need to assess if if our outreach programs are working, or if there's an impact in what it is that we are trying to achieve by going out there and advocating. And then lastly, we need to also create gender-sensitive complaints handling processes and create a safe and confident environment for complainants who report grievances related to gender discriminations or violence. So yes, so we need to make sure that our space where complaints come is like a safe haven. We need to ensure that we make the complainant feel safe, they feel heard, they feel understood, so that they can open up about the issues that may affect them in terms of gender discrimination. Now, in closing, I would really say that, I mean, as ombuds offices, we still have a long way to go, and we need to ensure that we actually fix the underlying problems first. So without fixing the underlying crucial inequities that continues to hold down women, the journey towards achieving equality that we so dreamed of is like a long pipe dream. The fact, but you know what gives me comfort is that the fact that we are gathered here today to deliberate over the topic indicates that there is a step in the right direction. And we also need to realize, though, that more still needs to be done. It is of most importance that ombuds offices not only look at the matters at face value. We need to dive deep and understand the root causes of why such issues are happening in our communities in order to determine where the challenges are and what remedies could be put in place to try and resolve challenges. So we don't need to wait for a complainant to come into our doors, or we don't need for a complainant to die in order for us as ombudsmen to act up. We can look at the trends of what's happening in the media, what's happening in the news, so that we can take up our own initiative in terms of trying to resolve gender-based issues. The ombudsman offices have a great deal of work ahead of them, because according to research, many GBV incidents go unreported, and it seems like the perpetrator's dependency was one of the driving forces behind this. With that said, I would like to thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I would also like to give a special thanks to the Public Protector of South Africa, Advocate Koleka Gcaleka, who had given me the opportunity to present here today as part of your own initiative and a drive to expose young women to such platforms.
Very much, Ms. Zaula, for your presentation. It was very much clear from your presentation that some ombudsman institutions need specially trained staff to deal with gender-based violence and other family law issues which come up in our courts. Quite often, the victims, who may be mostly women and young children, do not have support when they are going through the court process. Even from the time that they report their cases to the police, we need that emphasis from our ombudsman institutions, because when a victim who is a woman is not properly supported, is not properly guided, it will impact the other victims in future, because they will find that it's no use reporting their complaints or their cases because they don't get the support they need. So thank you very much for also pointing out that even where the jurisdiction of the ombudsman institution is limited, an ombudsman can always think outside the box to see how best to protect those who are victims, and also carrying out campaigns for people to understand the work of the ombudsman, and also promoting establishment of offices in the country so that nobody is left behind. Those are issues which are still challenging for most of our ombudsman institutions, because we should always look to improving the services and also being relevant to the situations in our communities. as ombudsman institutions. So thank you very much for that presentation. We are now looking at the questions that may be posed by the listeners. I'm afraid our timing will be very, very limited. So when questions are picked for particular presenters or just for general questions for any of the presenters to answer, please, we'll limit the answers to 1 minute. And we also expect the questions to be questions, not observations. With that, we move on to the question section. Are we going to have them on the screen?
No, I don't think so. Just as you wrote them, you can just ask the questions and guide panelists to answer.
All right. Some of the questions that have been presented are that what measures do we put in place to balance imbalance of the past, especially to enable women to climb the ladder in leading and also to hold higher positions, both in the workplace and society at large? These are issues which were specifically touched on by Honorable Nachelle Ramirez Hernandez when she discussed bias generally in our communities. What measures do you think we should put in place to balance the imbalances that of the past? Honorable Nachelle Ramirez Hernandez, if you wish to comment or respond.
Sí, sí. A ver, lo que hemos hecho... ¿Ya? Yes, I'm here. What we have done in... A ver, perdón, voy a hablar en español entonces. Lo que hemos hecho es incidir en lo que se llaman acciones afirmativas, ¿no? Para poder avanzar sobre reducir las brechas de género en las cuestiones laborales. Eso es una primera ruta. Y la otra es que últimamente estamos impulsando desde la comisión, desde la Comisión de la Ciudad de México, la integración del sistema de cuidados. Es decir, no podemos separar la agenda laboral de la agenda de cuidados, porque la carga de cuidados está feminizada. Entonces, muchas veces, pues tenemos en la mayoría de los casos, el mundo laboral no compensa, no tiene ninguna mirada que permita el crecimiento o mayor crecimiento o la reducción de las brechas de desigualdad, porque pues tenemos pues la doble o la triple jornada en muchas ocasiones, ¿no? Entonces, lo que estamos empujando no nada más es cómo transformamos y hacemos políticas afirmativas en el ámbito laboral, sino últimamente cómo empujamos desde las oficinas de Ombudsperson, en particular la nuestra, el sistema de cuidados como una parte fundamental para reducir esas brechas.
Can I compliment and offer a suggestion as well, Honorable Mumba?
The other question is, how important is gender equity in organizations, in organization success in our various institutions? I would like to ask Dr. Janine Hicks, because her presentation was full of empirical evidence on what is happening across the world. So maybe you can comment on this question. How important is gender equity in organization success?
Okay, so we do have empirical studies that connect that connect the bottom line. If you look at the private sector in terms of successfully performing companies that understand issues of diversity and transformation tend to outperform companies that don't. So it's not that, you know, employing more women will make more money for a company, but it's where entities have that understanding about the implication and the importance of diversity management, of transformation, ensuring that the equal opportunities and equity within their institutions and that those reflect the society in which they're based. Those companies tend to have the edge. So companies that address diversity outperform companies that don't. That's a bottom line in terms of company spreadsheets. In the public sector, I made reference to this in terms of the World Economic Forum and the World Bank's concerns. Companies that have worked to close the gender gap in terms of access to education, health, women in politics, and women in the economy outperform countries that don't in terms of their national income, average national income, in terms of their attainment of, in terms of their own GDP, and their attainment of their development goals. So there's a solid rationale for both the public sector and the private sector to address diversity and transformation. I wanted to speak on that earlier issue around how do we transform that imbalance as well, because our tendency is to focus on empowering women, as if the problem with the failure for transformation is that women are not empowered. That, you know, oh dear, if only women were more advanced or were smarter or had more training, then there'd be equality in our society and equality in our institutions. That's only one half of the coin. We do need empowerment programs for women. We need business coaching. We need access to finance for women who are starting up and trying to manage and grow their own businesses. And we need to address the transformation of social norms in our society, as our previous speaker had spoken to. But that does not deviate from the fact that we need to challenge and transform and dismantle this embedded inequality and discrimination and disadvantage in our institutions of society, in the business, in the workplace, in our political space, within our cultural and our religious spaces. And that requires real, deliberate, targeted measures. We can't just focus on empowering women if we want to eradicate gender inequality. We have to challenge and eradicate discrimination and inequality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The interesting question here, I will direct it to Zaula, who talked about family law cases where women are victims. The question is, how can our male partner contribute to eliminate gender-based violence and femicide? Ms. Zaula, please.
Thank you very much.
Did you get the question?
Can you please repeat?
How can our male partner contribute towards eliminating gender-based violence and femicide?
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson. So I think what men can do is to become advocates of gender-based issues or gender-based related issues that affect women. They can ensure that they do this by supporting women and participating in their own forums. They can build forums where they discuss issues that are related to gender-based and how to eradicate gender-based violence. They can also, ensure that they mentor young girls and women in the workplace, and set up examples and ensure that they actually want to empower women wherever they may be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We should indicate that any other questions can be sent to the website, and they will be answered by either the speakers or other people who are specialized in those areas, which the questions will cover. So we've come to the end of our webinar session, celebrating this month of women. Thank you so much to all the speakers, beginning with Dr. Janine Hicks, Honorable Nacheli Ramirez Hernandez. We enjoyed your insights into the biases. And Ms. Landisa Zaula, we also enjoyed your provocation for ombudsmen to think outside the box. One can see that these presentations actually demonstrate how much ombudsman institutions have to catch up in our countries, in our communities, even in the ombudsman offices themselves. One has to start from there. How is gender equity handled in the office of the ombudsman before they even go outside to other institutions? Very rich resources, very rich empirical evidence covering more or less all the issues that touch on the welfare of women in our communities, and also challenging our politicians, our other leaders in our communities to really seriously look into these biases, promote laws which accommodate gender equity, and also policies and practices, even by ourselves as members of our communities. So thank you so much for your contributions. We wish everybody a happy month, and also we wish to promote good health and pleasure for all women involved. Thank you very much. The President.
Thanks, colleagues. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I call upon the President to close the session.
Sou eu a apresentar uma? Excelência, honorável doutora Nachelle Ramírez Fernandes, presidente do Instituto Internacional dos Provedores de Justiça a nível internacional e presidente da Comissão de Direitos Humanos do México, honorável doutora Coleca Beleca, protetora pública da África do Sul e presidente da ORC da região da África, honorável Carolina Socone, provedora de Justiça da Zâmbia, secretária-geral da ONU, tesoureira do IOI, estimada moderadora, juíza Florence Numba, distinta representante da Universidade do KwaZulu-Natal, estimados provedores e mediadores. Hoje, de facto, foi um dia em que todos ganhamos experiências com as várias intervenções que foram feitas e que nos permitiram ter um horizonte maior do que se passa a nível mundial em relação à desigualdade entre o homem e a mulher. Os temas que falamos sobre compreender a equidade do género nas organizações, pela doutora Janine, o papel dos gabinetes dos provedores de justiça na abordagem dos preconceitos do género, pela doutora Nachelle, e o tema sobre estudo de casos e melhores práticas dos gabinetes de provedores de justiça, pela professora doutora Zaula, permitiram ver que ainda há muitos países no mundo em que não há igualdade do género, tanto a nível econômico, como social, como político, nos vários casos, cargos de liderança e chefia, onde se destacou alguns, portanto, que têm mais, como América Latina, Zâmbia, África do Sul. Podemos dizer também que Angola vai ganhando espaço a nível dos cargos de decisão. Nós temos, a nível dos tribunais, uma presidente do Tribunal Constitucional, 3 vice-presidentes do Tribunal de Contas, Supremo e Constitucional. Também, a nível do Parlamento, temos uma presidente do Parlamento e 40% de deputadas. Temos uma vice-presidente da República. E, a nível dos órgãos do poder central e local, vamos aumentando ainda ligeiramente, uma vez que ainda não conseguimos chegar aos 50%. Temos uma média. Com esta sessão, houve várias recomendações do papel do provedor de justiça na defesa dos direitos das mulheres, da igualdade do género, e nós em Angola foi criada uma comissão por despacho da provedora de justiça para acompanhamento dos casos de violência doméstica, já que, de uma forma geral, as mulheres ainda se sentem intimidadas ou até com receio de virem fazer queixas sobre os casos de violência doméstica, mas existem muitos também em Angola, embora, por acaso, dos países da África não estejam muito longe, mas existem casos de violência contra a mulher e contra a criança. Eu, por último, continuo, portanto, a incentivar que as instituições de provedores de justiça devem divulgar mais a promoção e proteção dos direitos da mulher, da igualdade do género, em todas as áreas econômicas, sociais, política e econômica, e que possam, de facto, atingir os 50%, como se diz, portanto, a nível da União Africana, das Nações Unidas, em todos os cargos de decisão a nível partidário, político e em todas as esferas da sociedade. Não só por serem mulheres, mas porque existem, de facto, muitas mulheres que têm capacidade, experiência, bagagem para atingirem determinados cargos e muitas vezes não atingem esses cargos em detrimento dos homens. Muito obrigado a todos e eu desejo a todos os provedores e mediadores que nos seus países possam, de facto, influenciar os governos, parlamentos, os órgãos de soberania todos, para que as mulheres sejam colocadas nos seus lugares sempre que tiverem competência para tal. Muito obrigado a todos, continuação de bom dia.
Thank you so much. Thank you.